Welcome, supporters and advocates of democracy, to our virtual fundraiser event with the Lincoln Project, Field Team 6, and Hopium Chronicles, an inspiring gathering where the power of our collective voices and expertise converge for a common cause. I'm Eddie Estrada with Blue City 2 New Mexico, and I'm thrilled to be your moderator tonight for this momentous occasion. Tonight, we're joined by political superstars Reed Galen, Simon Rosenberg, and Dale Roy Robinson. Together, we'll discuss the ideals of democracy, the transformative impact of relational organizing, local strategies, and talk about how we will win the elections in 2024. Together, we are architects of a future where every voice is heard, every opinion matters, and every person is empowered to shape their destiny. Your presence tonight adds a unique layer to the mosaic of voices advocating for a more just, equitable, and democratic world. May our shared commitment to democracy be the driving force that propels us forward, creating ripples of change that resonate far beyond the confines of this digital space. So without further ado, I want to begin our celebration by introducing Blue City 2 New Mexico's founder and leader, Rochelle Williams.
Thank you, Eddie, and welcome, everyone. I want to thank our panelists, our sponsors, and all our attendees for joining us this evening. Blue City 2 New Mexico chose early on to pursue two strategies. Number one, register new Democrats. We partnered with Field Team 6 to do that, registering 5,000 new Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents in 2022. Number two, engage non-voters and turn them into voters. We went after the people who are registered to vote but did not vote in 2018 or 2020. These are the voters that campaigns and parties generally don't have the resources to go after. We had surprising success there too, getting more than 4,000 of these reluctant voters to the polls. As everyone knows, our district is one of the most competitive in the nation, and Gabe is up against Yvette Herrell's well-funded MAGA machine. It's crucial not just to this district, but to our country, that we do everything in our power to make sure Gabe is reelected. We need you to help fund that work. We have no institutional funding. Everything we do is made possible by the dollars you donate, so please donate generously. We leverage every dollar with hundreds of hours of donated time, so you get a big bang for your buck. Back to you, Eddie.
Thank you, Rochelle. I think now it's a perfect time to go ahead and spotlight our panel of superstars for this evening. We'll go ahead and start with Reed Galen. And Reed Galen is an independent political strategist and co-founder of the Lincoln Project, an organization whose mission is to protect the American Republic from Donald Trump and those who identify publicly or privately as MAGA supporters. The Lincoln Project sponsors the pro-democracy coalition, the Union, which aims to mobilize tens of thousands of volunteers to fight against threats to democracy at the ballot box and beyond. We also have Simon Rosenberg, who's a veteran political analyst, strategist, and commentator who has worked on two presidential campaigns, had senior roles at the DNC and the DCCC, and led the Democratic Advocacy and Research Group, NDN, for more than 2 decades. For good reason, he's called the guy who got the midterms right, predicting that the dreaded red wave would not come to pass. He now publishes the Substack newsletter, Hopium Chronicles, and has been instrumental in bringing awareness to the power of grassroots activism. Welcome back, Simon. And finally, we have Dale Roy Robinson, who's the COO of Field Team 6, whose motto is Register Democrats, Save the World. Field Team 6 has helped register 2.6 million Democrats in 2019, with 5,000 of them here in New Mexico's 2nd Congressional District. Before answering the call to save democracy, Dale was a television producer and network executive, producing documentaries, scripted and reality TV, and other media. Thank you all for being here with us in support of New Mexico. I'd like to give each of you a few minutes for some opening remarks and to briefly introduce what your organizations do. Let's go ahead and start with Reed.
Well, thank you, Eddie, and thanks to everybody for joining. I'm honored to be here and to have been invited. And so I just want to say, very briefly that, as we're all getting together now, it's hard to believe what we've seen in Washington, D.C. today. But it makes the mission that you all have, not only in New Mexico too, but your idea of flipping red districts to blue districts that much more important. I am a former Republican. Most of my co-founders are former Republicans. And if you had told us 10 years ago, this is where we'd be, that I'd be talking to you all tonight, I wouldn't believe you. But here we are, and I cannot be more proud to stand in lockstep and in locked arms with you all, because as you all know, coalition work is very, very difficult. You all work well above anything anyone could expect. You punch well above your weight. You're under-resourced and you overperform. And all I can say is that thank God there are organizations like yours all over the country, but especially here in New Mexico as well. And so what I would say is that over the course of the next year, think about this, it's less than a year until voters will actually have ballots in hand in many places. We have a heck of a lot of work to do, but a few good things. One is we have a very solid president who is doing incredible work, and you heard some of the bills that he signed with Gabe's help. We have the right on our side. And as our namesake, Abraham Lincoln said in his famous 1860 speech, right makes might. And I never have believed that more than I do right now. And lastly, there are more of us than there are of them. And I hate us versus them, but here we are, gang. We have more people, but we have to find them. We have to identify them. We have to register them if they're not registered, and we have to get them out to the polls, and we have to keep them focused over the course of the next year. It's very easy, as you all know, to get distracted by everything. There is never a time when we don't have 8 world-breaking crises going on now. We live in a pond of black swans. The black swan is now the white swan. Everything that we see on our television screens, on our phones, on social media, on the news, is one crisis after another, and it can seem overwhelming. But when we have big problems like you all have done, is you break them down into manageable pieces. How can we do this? How can we make this work? How can we be successful? And so I just want to wrap up by once again saying thank you to Blue CD2 New Mexico for having me, and happy to turn it over to whoever's next, if it's Simon or whoever.
Thank you, Reed. Yeah, let's go with Simon.
Eddie, thank you so much. And thanks, Constance and Rochelle, for building this remarkable organization. It's really an honor to be here. As some of you may know, my wife is from New Mexico. She was born in Albuquerque. My in-laws live in Santa Fe. I was married in Santa Fe many years ago, and I've been lucky enough to be an honorary New Mexican in my heart anyway. And I'll say that I'm more of a green guy than a red guy, and I appreciated the title of your podcast. Listen, what I'd just like to say is, first of all, just amazing work, and just so proud to be supporting you. I've been with you before. It was great to see some of the stuff that I've been advocating show up so powerfully in your work. It's really an honor to be a partner in that way with all of you. And so just thank you for, your proud patriots who love your country, who are working very hard, all of you who are here tonight, to make sure your democracy doesn't slip away. You all could be doing so many other things, but here you are in this discussion tonight. So thank you all. Second thing is, I just want to let you know that we're having a good year as Democrats. I mean, 2022 was a year we did much better than anybody anticipated. In the battleground states, we actually gained ground in Arizona, Colorado, Georgia, Minnesota, Michigan, New Hampshire, and Pennsylvania. We got to 59% in Colorado, 57% in Pennsylvania, 55% in Michigan, 54% in New Hampshire. Those would be remarkable performances in a good year. And this was remarkable performances in a tough year. And that strong Democratic performance has continued throughout 2023. We've, in 27 special elections for the House and the Senate all over the country, we've outperformed our 2020 numbers this year by 8 percentage points, an amazing performance. In a broader look at all elections that have happened this year, we're running above the partisan lean of our districts by 10 points. We've flipped Jacksonville and Colorado Springs, 2 of the largest Republican cities in the country. We took away the Wisconsin Supreme Court seat. We got to 57% in Ohio. We should feel really, really good about where we are. We have an immense amount of work to do in the next year to keep Gabe in Congress, to make sure we win the presidency and flip the House. But we got to take the wins when they come. And right now, our family is performing at an incredible level. And a lot of it has to do with the kind of work that you do and other hundreds of thousands of other Americans who've made it their life cause to make sure that democracy doesn't slip away. And so congratulations on building I speak to groups like this all the time, 2 to 3 times a week. You certainly are running one of the most sophisticated and impressive operations that I've seen anywhere in the country. And it's really an honor to be with all of you tonight.
Thank you, Simon. All right, Dale, floor is yours.
So Reed is surprised to be here because he used to be a Republican. I'm surprised to be here because I was helping produce a Japanese Western in Santa Fe in 1995, and I never thought I'd be working in politics. But here I am. I started with Field Team 6 2 weeks before the pandemic. And prior to the pandemic, Field Team 6, the motto, whose registered Democrats save the world, was 100% in-person voter registration. When the pandemic hit, we had to literally pull dozens and dozens and dozens of in-person voter registration drives off the calendar. Jason, the founder of Field Team 6, was lying in a corner in a fetal position, not sure what was going to happen next. And I treated it like a job because I've never known what I'm doing when I've been producing any project. It's always new. And so I said, well, maybe there's a silver lining here. Maybe we'll be able to reach even more people digitally than we could in person. And spoiler alert, our stretch goal prior to the pandemic was to register 100,000 Democrats before the 2020 election. And because we went digital, we helped register 785,000 before the election in 2020. And we know 498,000 of them voted. So we've just built on that since then. By the way, Eddie, we got the numbers a little wrong in my setup. It's actually 2.6 million more, or 2.6 million total since 2026. It was 1.8 million more added in the 22 cycle to the 785,000 we helped register in the 2020 cycle. So, and lastly, I want to say, I should say super thank you to Simon Rosenberg, who has been shouting out exactly what we're shouting out, which is that this work matters. Registering Democrats and getting them out to vote actually matters. And I love Simon's take on this, which is that we are in an environment of abundance. We should stop treating this like we are behind the 8 ball, that we don't have enough money, that we don't have enough resources. We are putting more money and resources into this fight than ever in history, and it's showing in the wins. So I love that expansiveness. I love that about Simon. Simon, thank you for coming and speaking at our Registered Democrat Summit. Thanks for promoting us on Hopium Chronicles. Reed, I want to shout out Jacqueline Westman, who is my contact at the union. The union is a fantastic partner. If I wasn't talking in front of all the CD2 people here, I would say that they're our best partner. But lastly, I have to shout out Rochelle, who reached out to us in 2022 and said, we see what you're doing with your postcarding system. Can you help us do it in CD2, which was not a target state? And I have to tell you that there's a reason why we want to partner with other organizations. Because we went digital, we are sitting on a mountain of gold. We are sitting on an unheard of database full of unregistered likely Democrats. Why does it matter that we partner with organizations like Rochelle? I'll tell you why. Because in the 22 cycle, we had 13 million of those records, in the vast majority of them in swing states. And we were able, with our resources, we were able to reach out to 5 million of them. That means that 8 million people in the database that I already own were not touched at all. We also know that when we reach out to this highly curated list, people get registered. And how do we know that? Because we have 8 million people in our database that we check against the voter registration rolls, and we can see how many of them get registered. And the short answer is, in the case, even in this highly curated list, it's not just the unwashed masses. It's literally likely Democrats in swing states in the vast majority of my database. Those 8 million that we did not touch get registered at about 27% of the time. But when Field Team 6 and our partners reach out to them with registration messages, with messages of hope, with messages of pro-democracy and pro-Biden and our accomplishments, about 36% of them get registered. That is insane. That is incredibly insane. So I have to shout out Rochelle Williams, who not only it was in the video, but I have to repeat it because this is something that I pitch to partners all the time in order to get them to join us. As I said, this is how we do it. New Mexico O2 reached out to us. They said, can you help us buy data and do a postcarding team? I said, absolutely. We bought 18,000 records of unregistered likely Democrats in the district. They sent out 60,000 postcards. That's more than 2 to each. Of those, we know that over 5,000 registered to vote. 2,800 of them voted, and Gabe won by 1346. That's how it works. So if you or anyone that you know is working in a swing state or in a swing district or something that you'd like to turn into a swing district, reach out to Field Team 6 at partnerships@fieldteam6.org, and we will hook you up. We can set you up with free text banking, free phone banking, free postcarding campaigns with data that we already own. And if we don't own data there, we'll do what we did for Rochelle. So anyway, thank you, thank you, thank you. This is a fundraiser. I think that's probably where they're going next. And I just want to encourage all of you to put your money where it matters, which is voter registration and the work that Rochelle and team are doing. And it is impressive. By the way, I have pitched this. I pitched this to a guy who reached out to us in Tennessee. His name is Andrew. He loved what was happening with Field Team 6. He loved this story about Rochelle. And he was like, you know what? My goal is to register 600,000 new Democrats in Tennessee in the next 6 years. I said, let's go. Let's start. And so he did. And we just had a Tennessee happy hour a couple of weeks ago. There were 5 candidates, 6 county chairs, and a whole bunch of grassroots organizations that showed up. They're all excited to do voter registration in Tennessee. You can claim that for you, Rochelle. You can absolutely claim that as a success, because now we're working in Tennessee, which is not a target state for us. We're not putting our own resources or volunteers into it, but we are absolutely putting our infrastructure and the data that we already own into the fight, and it's already working. So thank you.
That is fantastic news, Dale. Many thanks to our silver and amber sponsors that we're going to feature right now. We could not do this work without your generous support. Rainbow Ranch is our #1 silver sponsor. The amber sponsors are Thrive Consulting, Sunny 505, John Liebendorfer, Hal Gershenson, and Naomi Kiston. Thank you all for your generous support of Blue CD2 New Mexico's work. Back to you, Eddie.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Rochelle. Now, tonight's event is titled We Will Win, because we're all filled with hopium about next year. As each of our panelists are experts in their respective field, I want to start out by posing the following 2 questions for all of you to get your professional insight on 2 questions. Number 1, why do you think Democrats will win in 2024? And number 2, what do all of us need to do to make this happen? So I want to open up the floor to all of our panelists to answer, but let's kick it off by starting with Reed, and then everyone can chime in.
Well, thanks again, Eddie, and thanks to everybody again. Why do I think that Democrats have a better chance in 2024? Well, I think first and foremost, it helps to stand for something that most people like. Most people like what the president has done, what he has said, what Democrats in Congress, both in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate, have stood for. And I think that what you're seeing every day, look, as someone who focuses at the top of the ticket is, the president takes a very be not afraid attitude to really the multiple crises he's dealing with on a daily basis. But I would also say this is that he's very focused, and we saw this, and I think Simon really pointed this out last year, that democracy as an issue really does matter. When we first said, oh, we're going to talk about democracy, people were like, oh, nobody knows what that means. It doesn't matter. Nobody can figure out what it is. It's too big. I said, well, I think it's the only thing that's big enough. And so I think that we really have that going for us. And I think the flip side of that is that, for so long, Republicans loved culture wars. They loved to fight culture wars, and candidly, Democrats weren't very good at fighting back at them. Now the culture has shifted significantly. The Dobbs decision was a radical decision, and it was seen as such by most Americans. It is not a traditional, quote unquote, traditional decision. This is a 50-year-old decision. I think that issues like climate and school shootings, I got 2 school-age girls, right? Generation Z, right? Generation Lockdown has woken up. And I think they saved our bacon in many ways last year. And I think that they can, if suitably and continually contacted and encouraged, can do the same again. But I would also say that, at the end of the day, it's always better to be for something in a campaign than to be against something. And right now, I think you see between demographics, the work that Field Team 6 and all of you here in New Mexico, which is, yes, a beautiful state, one of my favorites, are doing, I think are very good at, this. And here's the other part too. As someone who has to spend more time diagnosing Donald Trump's various maladies, this is a guy who stormed out of a courtroom today, right? How do you think it's going to be when he's sitting at a witness table in federal court with a bunch of people going, he made me do it, he told me to do it? You think he's going to be better or worse? Do you think he's going to be more likely to pull independent and soft Republican and otherwise disaffected Democrats across the line? I don't think so. And so I feel good, but I would say this is feeling good does not equal complacency. And so I think that the work that you all are doing and have done, I think is hugely important. I think the work that Dale Roy Robinson and Field Team 6 do is hugely important, especially at the levels they're doing it. And let me just shout out to Simon here, which is Simon spreads the gospel. He spreads the good word. And he does it as well, if not better, than any Democrat I've ever heard it. If you have a competent and confident Democrat, they will beat a MAGA person every time. We just saw it in Tennessee. I don't even know if that guy was a Democrat or not, but MAGAs will lose against competence and confidence, and I believe that that's going to happen next year.
Simon, you go. Oh, you're muted.
I know, and I got it. So I co-sign on everything that Reed said, and I also just want to praise. I actually haven't seen Dale do his thing, and it's very impressive. So let me say a few things. One is I already mentioned, and I think we're in actual elections where people are voting, not in polls that we learned in 2022. We're not very predictive of what happened in the election. We continue to outperform expectations. We've had a really, really good year, and in that sense, I'd much rather be us than them heading into 2024. Second is that Joe Biden is a good president. The country is better off. We have made these investments that are going to make us prosperous and grow the economy for a generation to come. And the Democratic Party is strong. And we're strong in part because of hundreds of thousands of Americans who are, not letting their democracy slip away. We have this new superpower, which is all of you, all across the country. And it's been so inspiring to see. But what do they have, right? We've got a strong president. The country's better off. He's going to have a very strong case for re-election. What do they have? They have Trump and MAGA and this new speaker, right? It is a mess. It's, this is an historically terrible political party. And as I like to say for Reed, the party of Lincoln and the party of Reagan is now also the party that tried to end American democracy in 2021. And that will always be true, and it will never not be true as part of the story of the modern Republican Party. And so I'm very optimistic as a strategist that if you move the chess pieces, right, we know from polling that voters don't know what Joe Biden's done. And when they are informed, his numbers go way up. That's what a campaign's for. This is a doable thing, right? We're winning elections. We've got a strong argument. We've got a strong party itself. Our apparatus is very strong. What do they have? They got Trump. Who would you rather be, right? And it's why I'm so optimistic about what we're going to be able to do next year. And I've even written a memo saying I think we should not just try to win in 2024, but we should try to get to 55. We should try to expand our coalition, take away demographic and geographic real estate from them, as we've been doing in Jacksonville and in Colorado Springs and in Wisconsin and Ohio, right? They're leaving open voters. It's the whole reason the Lincoln Project exists, right? There's this incredible opportunity to reach people that we couldn't reach before. And, shame on us if we don't take advantage of it, right? We've got the ability to expand our coalition, get to 55%, not just 51.5%. Because if we can make this election a clear repudiation of MAGA, not just a narrow, squeaky victory as we've had in recent years, it will do so much to start to loosen MAGA's dark grip on the Republican Party, which would be good for Republicans, would be good for the country, would be good for us, obviously, but more importantly, it would be good for the Republican Party and it would be good for the country, because we need a normal Republican Party again someday and not the party that we have. It would be good for all of us have a party that Reed could go back to if he wanted to someday. Although we'll take him, we'll take Reed. If you're going to stick with us, we'll take you.
No, thank you.
So anyway, that's why I'm so optimistic about what we're going to be able to do next year, and why we can now help Gabe not win by a couple thousand votes, but maybe in the upper thousands of votes to make him secure for a long time to come.
I get asked this question a little bit all the time because you do run into people who are depressed in the Democratic Party by just the sheer amount of chaos. Yeah, it's exhausting, the amount of chaos that MAGA can pump out on a daily basis. And I'll tell you why I think we're going to win in 24. And it's because I get to wake up every day and I get to work with people like Leora and Rochelle. And I get to hear from Simon, and I get to hear from Reed, and I get to watch those Lincoln Project videos. But more importantly, I get to benefit from the 65,000 volunteers that are part of the union as a partnership, and to think back on how many organizations, how many grassroots organizations, how many grassroots activists kicked into gear when Trump won in 2016. Jason Berlin, the founder of Field Team 6, was a producer and a writer in television at that time. But I actually hired him on an MTV project in 2000, just for those who are going to play the trivia game when we do our 5-year anniversary party that's coming up. But he couldn't handle it. He couldn't handle Trump getting elected. And so he quit his job in the entertainment industry. He's been there for 18 years. He quit and he went to work for the resistance. He was not the only one. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of similar people who started working for the resistance. And I get to talk to them every day. That's why I'm excited to get out of bed. And I'll tell you the other excitement that I have, which is because this is all new, because everything is new. When it comes to like what we are doing right now, I'm excited to see what's next. Here's an example. I think in the video it talked about the need to register more youth voters, right? Well, here's an interesting example, and Simon, you're going to know this because you're on the board. But Civic Center came out with statistics that said about 27% of youth vote. But 86% vote if they're registered. The simple act of registering turns them into super voters. That's what we want to do. And by the way, Field Team 6 has a secret plan that it's not so secret because I'm telling it right now, to register a whole bunch, hundreds of thousands of youth voters, 18 to 24. What it means is reaching new sources of data that we have access to, and then reaching out to unregistered, likely Democrats who are 18 to 24 and getting them registered. If we get enough money into this process, we can absolutely register between 300 and 400,000 youth voters between 18 and 24. And by and large, they are Democrats that are out there anyway. That's not hard to reach in that group. So that's our secret plan. We're working on that right now. Excited about that. And yeah, I have a lot of hope that we're going to win in 2024. And it's because of all of you. Everyone on this call is part of it.
Thank you, Dale. One quick question before we take our next break. Dale, you mentioned big data. What role will big data, social media, and digital outreach play in affecting turnout in 2024?
So you're asking me. You guys are cutting edge. You guys are basically doing all of the things that we are doing as well. The targeted ads, the emails. We just did an email program, by the way. We're in the process of doing a deep dive on the data from the 22 cycle to see exactly what worked and what didn't. And one of the people that is a super volunteer for Field Team 6 noticed that out of that 8 million folks that we didn't reach out to in our untouched data from the 22 cycle, there were 2.3 million of them that had emails. Well, email is one of the most effective ways that we can reach people, and it only costs 0.5 cent each. And she brought that to my attention, and she was like, shouldn't we try to reach all those people before the end of the year so that we can find out who gets registered so that we don't have to spend more money on them next year? And the answer was yes. And so we put together a fundraiser and we raised $11,000, and we've sent them already for anybody with an election in the 23 cycle, but we're going to send an email between now and the end of the year to all 2.3 million of them. And then we're in the process of raising another $4,000 or $5,000 to send a second email to them. And by the way, about 33 to 36% of those people will likely get registered. That is incredible. So yes, big data is huge, and big data is also the key to this idea of registering youth. So yeah, any way that we can slice it. And by the way, we're not giving up on in-person voter registration. Once the vaccines came back and boosters happened, we put those out in the field. There's still volunteers that want to do that. But the real numbers get turned in when you start registering people digitally.
Hey, Eddie, can I just jump in for a second?
Absolutely.
About youth registration, and Dale is right that I'm obsessed with it. If I could wave my Harry Potter magic wand and political wand, it would be that we would launch a national youth voter registration drive, or we would have in the spring of this year. Hasn't happened yet, but there's been lots of great individual efforts around the country. If you take the 2020 election results and keep everything the same in 2024, but only change one thing, which is have under 45-year-old voters vote at the same level as their population distribution, which is not a crazy thing, right? It's not a pie in the sky thing. Biden wins by 10 points, that one thing. I mean, the opportunity for us to go deep into the youth vote, which is 10, 15, 20 points plus Democrat, even potentially more, given how far away the Republicans are moving away from the main priorities of young people now, far more so than even in the last cycle with abortion and gun rights and the extremism that we're seeing every day. That the opportunity for us to grow and expand our coalition by registering young people, to me, is probably the highest priority. If I could do one thing as a Democrat, is to have this huge commitment to youth voter registration. Field Team 6 has been amazing at this. They've been a leader in this. They've been, and it's a universal opportunity for us. And it's just great to hear tonight some of the plans that I sort of notionally know about, and I need to get more briefed on it, because this is, arguably our greatest political opportunity in the short term before the general election kicks in the spring and summer of next year.
Thank you, Simon. All right, let's hold that thought.
But Diana Bell, Constance Musels, Lane Leckman, and Deborah Hall, Ruth Yeager, and Steve Wolf are all choral sponsors. I think we have a couple more now. Thank you all so much for believing in us and supporting our work. And I'm going to hand it back over to you, Eddie.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rochelle. And thank you to all of our donors and supporters. So we just heard about social media and programmatic ads. We left off discussing the youth vote. I want to talk a little bit about reluctant voters and demographics around what we call, reluctant voters. As you know, Blue CD2 has been using Simon's playbook and getting loud. But what else should we be doing to reach these demographics? And I'll leave that for anyone.
Well, I'll start. I don't think it's terribly complicated. It's just work intensive. You just got to keep after them. You've got to remind them why, voting matters. So many folks, one of my senior advisors, the Lincoln Project, Stuart Stevens, just has a new book out. He said, voter fraud in this country has never been a problem. We can't get people to vote in the first place, right? And so getting folks to show up is tough. I think that to the extent that, as you're registering people in states where there are, permanent absentee or mail-in voting, whatever you call it in your state, I think that's a hugely important thing to be able to do, because then, it's not the stress of getting to the elementary school, getting to the post office, wherever that might be. You could sit on your couch and do it. But again, I think that taking all of the things that have been discussed here this evening, and as Simon said, this is what campaigns do. I think the president's campaign and probably the national organizations will do a lot. But at the end of the day, they're never going to know your voters the way you all are. They're never going to know your states or your counties or your districts the way you are. And I think it's hugely important that if you're going to go after these reluctant voters, that frankly, y'all be the first to get to them, because you're going to have a message that works for them. You're going to have a ground truth about what's going on in your area that somebody sitting, in Northeast DC is not going to have, or Southwest DC isn't going to have. And so from my perspective, it's just, reminding people the importance, getting to them early, and getting to them often. And I think that, I get it, right? We have two finite commodities in campaigns, time and money. And one is usually directly related to the other. But I think that if you get to those folks first, right, in an organized way, I think that there's a real possibility to get them to turn out in higher numbers than they have before.
Yeah, and I'll add that, and Dale brought this up earlier. So much of Democratic Party strategy was born in a time of scarcity and not abundance, that we didn't have a lot of money. The Republicans always outspent us. A lot of we have a lot of younger voters who don't watch television. And so it was sort of hard to reach them, and we have a much more racially diverse coalition. Another reason why it's kind of hard for particularly older white consultants to sort of understand how to reach to a new electorate. There are all these reasons that we had for being very conservative about our targeting of voters, our targeting of districts. And in 2018, when I was the lead advisor, outside advisor to the DCCC, one of my proudest things that I did is I was an advocate for us dramatically expanding the number of races we were playing in to expand the playing field. And because we had been in 2016, we'd been too narrow. We had not competed in enough races. And so we didn't win enough races, because you don't win everything. You can't score unless you shoot, right? I mean, you got to go. And so we tripled the number of targeted races that we played in 2018. And we ended up winning a lot of them. And one of the reasons we did so well is we actually, expanded the playing field, spread out the Republican money across the country, right? We made it much harder for them to keep up with us. And I think that we are in a revolution now, or a huge change in mindset. Our campaigns now have 2 to 3 times the amount of money that they had. We have got younger consultants and organizations like yours that can fill in the gaps where the campaigns can't go. But this notion that we got to be conservative in our targeting is a holdover from a different age that we have to shake. And in part of the reason we do it is because it's easy, and campaigns are hard, right? This stuff is really hard. And so what you're doing by reaching out to marginal voters or reluctant voters, there's different words for them. The way to think about it as Democrats is that there are more Democrats than Republicans, but we have more episodic voters than Republicans do. And so this targeting of episodic voters or reluctant voters is sort of the holy grail of our business right now, right? Because there's so many voters we don't talk to. There's so many people we always don't get to young people because they're at the kids' table. We never get to Hispanics until the final week, right? All those groups that are hard, we often don't really ever get to. And so the work you're doing to sort of prioritize those that often get left behind in a campaign is so essential. And it is a model for other places. It's also a model for how we have to reinvent the Democratic Party more broadly to really operate in a time of where we're honoring our entire coalition and not just sort of older white voters, which is still the central way that we communicate.
I'm not going to touch so much on how to reach these voters, but I do want to offer up a resource once we do. And Simon, I know you know about this. This is called Blue Voter Guide. We know that there are young people, there are infrequent voters that will oftentimes vote at the top of the ticket, but when it comes to down ballot, they will leave a lot of that blank because they don't feel prepared. They don't feel like they've done enough homework to actually authorize themselves to make a decision on a candidate, on a proposition, on a judge. I actually used Blue Voter Guide in 2020 and 2022. It started out as just a spreadsheet on propositions in Southern California, and then it has built. Since then, it is now operating in all of the states with major elections in 2023, and it's going to go wide to all 50 states in 2024. If you haven't heard of it, check it out, bluevoterguide.org. It's very simple. Anybody who wants to use it puts their address in, and it will pull up all of the races on their ballot, and it helps them build a ballot guide that they can take into the ballot booth, or to fill out their absentee ballot if they like. But basically, each of the Democrats or independents will have endorsements next to them, so that you can easily see that Karen Bass has 45 endorsements for mayor of Los Angeles, where Rick Caruso has Kim Kardashian. And he's not really a Democrat. He just turned into a Democrat 2 weeks before he filed to run for mayor. And it fooled no one who used Blue Voter Guide. But anyway, it's super helpful. Youth voters will absolutely vote down ballot because they will feel more prepared. And by the way, even somebody like myself, who's voted in every election that I could since I turned of age, it's helpful to help me do the homework. I'm most interested in those races where it's like there are organizations that I trust on both sides and they have arguing points. And it's like, well, that's where I'm going to spend my time, is I'm going to read up from both those endorsements to see where I believe, where I fall. And so I can't say, highly enough, if you're going to reach out to youth voters, if you're going to reach out to reluctant voters or sometimes voters, make sure that they know about Blue Voter Guide. You're going to get better results if they use it. So share it widely. Somebody just put the link for fieldteam6.org in there. You can find Blue Voter Guide on our website. It's under resources. But yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, gentlemen. The question I have is, how do we get some of the massive amounts of money that's floating around in election ecosystems into funding this type of work?
I'd like that answer too.
Well, look, as someone who spent almost all of my political career up into the last 4 years dealing with Republicans, as I think Simon noted, Republicans turn the spigot on and never turn it off. It has been a surprise to me, the reluctance, exhaustion, panic of the Democratic donor community. I think you guys also invented small dollar contributions. But I think that this is one that's, there's never enough money. And we should remember that money in campaigns buys you options, right? It doesn't buy you victory. And so it's a matter of how do you get the money, but also once you have it, how are you going to spend it? You all have a very sophisticated program. I wish more folks had half of what it is you put together. But what I would say is that money is an incredibly important asset, but it is not the only one. And the more smart thinking you do, the more smart planning you do, the more efficient every single one of those dollars is going to be. And so I think it's, yes, how do you get the biggest gross amount of money you can get, but also how are you spending it smarter? Look, Simon was talking about old consultants, and I now consider myself an old consultant, right? Like if somebody says, how we're going to win this race, we're going to spend $1 million of broadcast television in Albuquerque, like you should run for the hills, right? That is not going to do it. But I think that it's still very hard with those big donor groups, tables, whatever they call them on the Democratic side of the aisle, to be convinced that big ticket items aren't the way to go. And I think that if we knew that more folks like you all, right, the more that we can do to make sure folks know that you all exist and groups like you all exist, I think we can get some of that money to shake the trees and get down to where it needs to be.
Yeah, I'll say two quick things. I think it's important that you're building the space in New Mexico. As you know, there are lots of folks in New Mexico who can afford to contribute, even though it's not a rich state. There is a class of donors that care about the state deeply, and I think you're trying to tap into them with events like this. The other thing that Reed and I and others who speak to donors have to do a better job at is to try to challenge the Democratic donor community to be more comfortable with risk, and to not sort of do herd giving. In essence, the protection of the herd. Everyone sort of follows a few handful of things, right? And they feel safe in giving that way. And I was involved in founding the Democracy Alliance, which is the largest organization of wealthy funders in the Democratic Party, almost 20 years ago. And the goal of that organization, in my mind, when we founded it, was to create like a venture capital fund, a fund of risk risk-taking donors who put new money into new places, to uncrowded places, right? And I think the DA ended up becoming something very different than I would have hoped, which it became sort of a herd giving place where it sort of followed the things that potentially in some cases didn't even really need money. And we've got to do a better job, those of us like Reed and I and Dale, in talking to groups. I spoke to a group of very wealthy donors today. There has to be more comfort of going into uncrowded spaces. And somehow, we've got to figure out as advisors, as thought leaders, is to free up, to sort of start attacking the herd mentality in democratic giving, to create, because we are actually living through a period of enormous experimentation in the democratic family in a way that's super exciting and super compelling. And that's going to make our democracy stronger, make our party stronger. When I talk to the DNC, and I do a lot, I keep telling them that this is the strongest Democratic Party any of us have ever seen. It's just not all being run through the party anymore. And we have to figure out how to create a new model for how this all works. And part of this is what I get to witness, like Dale, right, is that I get to speak to groups like this all over the country, as does Reed, the innovation that's happening, the experimentation, the excellence of data management, the way that you guys are going about this. It's so incredible to witness. It's part of the reason I started Hopium, was that I felt there was a community of people that were really trying to save their democracy and make the country better. And I wanted to help them. I've spent the last 30 years of my life advising senators and congressmen. Now I'm here, with you. And I feel like I'm actually adding much more value than I was adding before. But we've got to work to start changing the mentality of the Democratic Party, to recognize we're in a period of enormous innovation and experimentation, and we need more risk capital into projects like yours, that in order to take advantage of all the innovation that's happening. There's got to be a different way of thinking about this. Reed, we need to gather and talk about this, because I think it's holding us back a little bit as a family, because people are ready to go.
I just want to echo a little bit of what Reed said there for a second, which is this idea of the consultant class and television ads. Coming from the television industry, I don't want to badmouth it too much, but when you spend millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars with television ads, what you're left with is nothing if you don't win. But if you're putting the money into the grassroots organizations that are helping register new Democrats and getting them out to vote, you are creating a stronger foundation for the party overall. And so my suggestion for anybody with a checkbook is to write a check right now to CD2 New Mexico, because they're going to use your dollar in a way that a television ad can't. So yeah, that was, once again, I'm starting the fundraising section again before I'm done. And by the way, Field Team 6, Field Team 6 has been the receivers of like a couple of, 5-figure donations over the course of our 5 years. It's really just a couple. It's a handful. The vast majority of our work gets done with small dollar donations. And the entire organization has been built to expand exponentially with more money that comes in. One of those big donations came in right before the 22 midterms. It was very late in the game. The target states that we were working in had already passed their voter registration deadlines, but there were 2 or 3 places that still had voter registration available in non-target states. And that's where we pushed the money at the last second. And I think 5 out of the 6 races that we worked in won. So yeah, don't be afraid of small dollar donations. Those are fantastic. We have a guy that basically every time we send a fundraising ask, he sends us $1. I don't know what he does for a living, but I love it. And I do want to talk to him at some point, because I just think that that's fantastic. I love that. And then I think, anything that you can give, please do, especially to organizations who are using your money in a very thoughtful, very targeted way, because it matters.
Great answers, gentlemen. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Rochelle. All right. So we're at the fun part now. I love getting to audience questions, because we can really get to know what the people in our communities are thinking. So our volunteer has been combing through the Q&As that are here on Zoom, and I have a few queued up. So I'm not going to go in any particular order, but I do see some real good juicy questions here. So I'm just going to throw them out there to everyone. First question. What fallout do you think there may be of what's going on right now in the Middle East? How might it or might not affect attachment to the Democratic Party?
Well, I'll start here. That I think that what you're seeing here is a good reminder, aside from the horror that we are seeing in Israel, is that our opponents, our adversaries overseas, will do whatever it is they can to create more dissension here inside the United States, to put more pressure on President Biden, whether or not it's the Russians or the Iranians or the Saudis or the North Koreans or the Emiratis, whoever it is. They're all in it together, right? And they see this election as existential to many of them. I think Vladimir Putin sees it, as Simon once told me, as actually existential to his existence personally, which is they need Donald Trump back in the White House. If they want to create a new hegemony of authoritarian governments across the world, Joe Biden can't be president anymore. And so I think that it has a direct effect here, because it's one more reminder again of that what we're up against, extends past our shores. And I think it also, creates interesting, I don't know, maybe interesting isn't the appropriate word, but, you see that 71% of Americans support President Biden's stance on Israel. The balance tend to be very young voters. There's some that say, okay, will they leave President Biden because of his stance on Israel versus Hamas and or Palestine? Maybe they're upset now. I tend to believe that, this is probably the smartest generation we've had. They might be upset about this one thing. I don't believe that they're going to burn the house down because of it. And sometimes you have to have sort of coming of age moments, which is, yes, you might be upset at the president for this one thing, but look at your alternatives. And so I think that it will be ongoing. I think that you will see our adversaries try and ramp it up, try and draw us further into that. But at this point, I think that, Joe Biden is Kennedy-esque in his approach to foreign policy, or LBJ or Reagan. He is not, he is not President Clinton. He is not President Obama. He is of the old school when it comes to this stuff. And I don't think you're going to see him, if he's already standing up to Vladimir Putin and Hamas, like this is not a guy who's going to go quietly into that good night.
Jump in just to keep in the order. And you're about to hear my dog, by the way, and we're going to go throw some food at him to quiet him up. I have an 11-year-old grumpy bulldog. I think I've been getting this question a lot in the conversations I've been having, and I think there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that there's a certain class of younger person or Arabs that are saying they're never going to vote for Biden, and I think this is all manipulated in social media. I think this is, in my view, I think that we're in the very early stages of this. This is going to be now a major part of the conversation over the next 12 months. I think the election is changing. I think we had sort of a period where, from Dobbs in spring of 2022 to the last few weeks, where there was sort of a very strong positive environment for us. And I think now what happened in Israel is changing that. The issues are around foreign policy are going to become more central to everything that's going to happen. And we have to make our case, right? We have to do well. Things have to feel better. We have to succeed in Ukraine. We have to make the Middle East better. And Joe Biden's going to have to spend a lot of time, as we all will, bringing along the American people in what we're trying to do. We're going to have a very consequential fight over Ukraine funding in the next few weeks. It certainly looks like that the new speaker is already today. The very first thing he did was decouple Iran and Ukraine, and the very first action he took, right, which is the thing that nobody wanted him to do. And so I think we shouldn't shy away from this debate. We need to have this debate. And I've got 3 Gen Z kids, and we got to bring them along. And there's some of their instincts in the early on, maybe worry and fear, but we've got to, we should welcome this debate we're about to have. Joe Biden's doing the right thing, in my view. He's doing the right thing in Ukraine, and he's doing the right thing in Israel. And we have to recognize that this really is, as Reed said, these are all, now manifestations of the same fight. that we're in. We are in a domestic and global fight against autocracy and dominion. And, we have been the party, we've been the country that's built an entire global order around freedom, FDR's four freedoms back in the 1940s. That world that we built, that's created a golden age for humankind. There's never been a better time to be alive in the world today than during this recent period. That world is really being challenged in unprecedented ways. And this is now going to become a major part of our politics. And so let's have this debate. Let's be smart about it. Let's not shy away from it. But I will say, as somebody who's got 3 Gen Z kids named Rosenberg, some of the things that we're seeing happening to young Jews around the country is alarming. And we've got to do better at university campuses, and we've got to make sure that we do our best collectively to keep this debate civil and smart and forward-leaning and respectful, because it's going to be tough and hard, but we should welcome that, in my view. I
couldn't say anything more than the two of you have said, so I'm just going to say I'm glad I'm registering Democrats right now. And I'm glad Biden is our president. I don't know who else from the Democratic slate who was up for president in 2020 could have handled all of the things that have been thrown at Joe Biden like he has handled them, with the deep, deep well of experience he brings to the table. So I'm grateful to be on this side.
Thank you all for the thoughtful answers. I have a question here about the third party no labels. And I want to throw this question to Reed first, because I saw that Rick Wilson of the Lincoln Project recently tweeted, "No labels will elect Donald Trump. It's not a question, it's a certainty." Reed, what are your thoughts? Is no labels a threat?
I think they are. I think they are. Just this week, our friends over at Third Way, Matt Bennett and his crew, which is sort of a center-left think tank, put out a memo that said that no labels. They went from first and foremost, they put out 4 different electoral maps this year so far, and they've changed every time. But just so you know, one of them had this magical unicorn independent candidate winning the state of Delaware, right? Also having, while they won Oregon and Missouri and Florida. Listen, guys, I've tried to do this twice, including for a guy named Howard Schultz. We couldn't make the math work with Howard Starbucks and $6 billion, okay? Just so you have a sense of my understanding of it. This week, they've now said, well, in fact, we don't know. In fact, we don't think we can get to 270 electoral votes. So we're going to go spend our time and effort finding this magical candidate. And then we're going to make sure that they spend all their time in the key electoral swing states. Because what they want now is a situation in which no presidential candidate gets 270 electoral votes and then goes to either A, the House of Representatives, which is done by delegation, remember, and Republicans still lead 26-22 in that case, or they want to extract concessions such that faithless electors, somehow switch their votes to one party or another, or to the no labels candidate. I mean, this is I've never done ayahuasca, but it would take me doing ayahuasca to figure out how to come up with something like this and think it was a good idea. And so from my perspective, the people running this thing, who Simon has known a long time and I have not, are apostates from their own party. Their donors come from the Republican money class in New York, LA, and Dallas. Harlan Crow, had them at his home in Dallas a few weeks ago. They have made this attempt to create this equivalency between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, which is, again, the height of ridiculousness. And that's me being polite, because I feel like you're a polite crowd. There's no possible way this is helpful to a Joe Biden. It is harmful. We have seen through polling that former member of Congress, former Democratic leader Dick Gephardt paid for, that in a state like Michigan, in a two-way race, it's like 49-44 Biden. This is a couple of months old now. But with the third party, it's Trump 42, Biden 39, and the rest gets chopped up between third party candidates. This is a terrible idea. We will make the case that whoever it is, and now they're trying to find a Republican to be the top of the ticket so that they can say, well, this will hurt Trump. It's all a lie. we will treat them like we'll treat any other anti-democracy candidate, right? They are out to help Donald Trump. You're not going to convince me otherwise, unless there's a memo that says we hate Donald Trump and we really hope we'll hurt him. They're not going to. So from my perspective, it could be Donald Trump, it could be No Labels, it could be Dean Phillips, whoever it is, whoever's making it harder for Joe Biden to get reelected next year. It is going to be our job to make sure that they do as little damage as possible to the president, his campaign, and ultimately the country.
Thank you, Reed. Anyone else want to chime in?
Jump in. I just want to acknowledge that in all the various splinter party, rogue party, third party efforts, the one that's been most successful is the one that Reed's part of. And that, we should be very grateful as Democrats that the Reed, Galen, Bill Kristol, Liz Cheney wing, which if we lived in a parliamentary democracy, this would probably be a separate moderate Republican Party that would be at 8 or 10% of the vote, that would be in a broader coalition with the Democratic Party. They've already made an enormous difference. And the one who's proven that can get things done, that can help swing elections, is the one that's on our side, right? The team like Reed, and imagine if Liz Cheney endorses Joe Biden. I'm tired. It's been a long day. Joe Biden next year and campaigns with him about the permission structure that will create for recalcitrant Republicans to stick or to go to Biden or stick with Biden. And so any conversation we have about these rogue party, splinter party movements, we should all be starting by reminding everybody that the one that's most important, that's proven to be impactful, is the one that's with us. And that our coalition is expanding, and that we are grateful that Reed is here with us. We're excited to create a spot at our dinner table for him and for Bill Kristol. I mean, I've been hanging out with all sorts of people in the last few years I never thought in a million years I'd be on the same team with. And we should be deeply, deeply grateful that rather than going off and doing other things in their life, that they're using this experience they've had on the other side to make us more effective and to help us win. And so remember that this is not all a bad story, a negative story. There's a lot of important stuff that's going right for us in this splintering of the Republican Party that's happened. And so I do think, though, as Reed pointed out, if I could just make one other point, the fact that the Republicans, that the Trump world is so desperate to flood the zone, not just with one third party movement, but now 3, right? One of them may be backfiring on them, the Robert Kennedy thing, is a sign of incredible desperation.
Right.
I mean, that they know that Donald Trump's ceiling is 45, 46, 47% of the vote. And so it's not good enough to have 1. They got to have 3, and maybe there's going to be a 4th, right? And all of that is another sign of how weak they are, and why, to me, yes, there are going to be bumps. There's going to be challenges, but in every way possible, I'd much rather be us than them as we head into next year.
I would just echo that, and I would say, like Ben Wickler says, just keep doing the work, because it is desperation. And this idea that it's unwinnable, that these forces arrayed against us are unwinnable, they want us to feel that. Don't buy into it. Keep doing the work.
Thank you all. All right. I have some interest around the data specifically that you mentioned, Dale. So I have 2 questions here for you. The first one is, how is your database different from Vote Builder? And what criteria do you use to identify people who are unregistered but likely to vote Democrat?
So we purchase our data from a list of 5 or 6 different political vendors that are well known to the political class, Catalyst and L2 and Civitech, et cetera, TargetSmart. And each one of those has a proprietary algorithm that they use to score the data of who's a likely Democrat. And so, what we've said, I mean, it's opaque to us, so we don't know exactly what it is. We do ask for a certain fuel mixture when we buy the data of, like, what percentage likelihood are they that they're likely Democrats. Basically, it's based on age, gender, ethnicity, and economic data. what was that? The Great Hack is the documentary that I watched right before the pandemic. And when I was told that there wasn't data out there on unregistered likely Democrats, I quoted that movie and I said, well, Facebook has 5,000 data points on every person who signed up. So I don't believe it. And turns out I was right. There is that data out there, but those algorithms are proprietary to each of the data vendors. And then we buy the data and then we reach out to them with a partisan message. So not only are we reaching people who we think are likely Democrats, but we're also reaching them with a message that is pro-Democrat, pro-democracy. And so if you're MAGA, you're gonna turn off. You're not gonna respond to that text, or you're gonna say Trump 2024 or something, and we're gonna flag you, and that data gets better as we go. But how do they figure out who's a likely Democrat? It's a guessing game, right? It's did you buy a Patagonia jacket? Did you eat kale? Did you donate to Sierra Club? Maybe you're just a super environmental MAGA guy, but probably not. And so that's how they do it.
Okay. I have a little bit of bad news, but I understand that it's late where Simon Rosenberg is calling in from, and I was told that he has to leave early. So Simon, I just want to recognize that we appreciate you jumping on. We appreciate what you do, and keep fighting the good fight.
Listen, I'm so impressed with what you're doing. I've just made a donation myself, and I hope that all of you who haven't yet should do it before you go. Again, I see organizations like this all over the country. It's so impressive. Not only am I an honorary New Mexican, so I'm, a little bit enthusiastic about anything like this that's happening in New Mexico, but this is a remarkable organization. You should be grateful they're doing the work here in your wonderful state. Please do support them. It really matters. And they've already proven they can make a difference. Let's give them even more capacity to do so in this critical election cycle. Thanks, everybody. I have an early start tomorrow, so I got to go. But good luck, and thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Simon. Good night. I found a question. This is open to anyone. It says, do you think Mike Johnson as Speaker will drive the suburbs blue?
I certainly think it gives us a head start. Let me say this. Let me take it from the Republican perspective, which might seem a little bit odd. I'm going to talk about the kind of Republican that I was. This is a guy who said in an interview, I think we need to be in people's bedrooms more. And he was talking about that in the context of the LGBT community, which he clearly has significant hostility for. This is antithetical to the Republican Party I grew up in, which was the party of individual liberty and government out of your business. And I think you saw, a good example of this last year, and I think we'll see a good example of this here in the next week or so, in Kansas and Kentucky, where reproductive rights measures were successful. Not about the issue of abortion necessarily, but about the position on individual liberty and government's role in your life. And I think that is something that, the Republican Party, we target soft Republican voters and conservative leaning independents. And I think a guy like this for Gen Xers is, somebody said, congratulations to the speaker from the first speaker from the 17th century or something. Like, this guy is so far out of bounds when it comes to suburban swing voters, and their daughters in particular, and their wives in particular, that I think that, he can't but help himself. This guy's a true believer, right? He's not Kevin McCarthy. I've known Kevin for years, right? Going back to the 2006 Arnold campaign. Kevin would believe whatever it is he needed to believe to get ahead, right? This guy really believes this stuff. He is an evangelical Federalist Society member. From my perspective, he is, as big a fascisti as certainly has ever occupied the speaker's chair. And so, yes, I think that his actions will give, I don't want to say definitely will happen, but I think it is a good catalyst to driving more suburban swing voters into the arms of, again, acceptable, and I think this is important, acceptable Democratic candidates in suburban districts.
Thank you.
I got nothing to add.
All right. Perfect. I want to recognize that we have some members in the audience from the other side of the country. And so somebody from Wisconsin is asking, they said, in my state, we lose down ballot races because we are losing rural voters. They vote blue at the top and red down ballot. This person mentions that they know that gerrymandering is part of it. And what can they do to turn that around?
Well, in Wisconsin, I think they've done a terrific job of turning that around by electing Janet Protasewicz to the Supreme Court in Wisconsin.
Right.
And by the way, if you ever want to be encouraged by the depth of the bench of grassroots and Democratic organizations working to register and turn out voters, go look at the chair of the Democratic Party's tweet following her win, where he thanks all of the organizations, and I'm not going to be shy. Ours was one of them, but we were just amidst like a list of like 180 different organizations that all helped get Janet Protasewicz to win that election. And I think Simon mentioned earlier, it was 56% or something like that she won by. Incredible. So that's how you do it. And so one of the first things that's going to be brought before her is the gerrymandering, and she ran on overturning the gerrymandered districts that are one of the worst in the states. So that's how you do it.
I would also say, and this is something just to extend on something that Simon said before he left about. He was putting it in the context of you've got to run in more races than you know you're going to win, right? You have to expand the field. And I would say that again, not being a Democrat, I think a lot of Democratic candidates and Democratic organizations have just decided that rural voters aren't available. I think there are more available. The ones that are available are probably the ones that just stay home, right? They're not Republicans. Nobody else talks to them. And so what I would say is this is, are there enough to win a given race? There might be. But if you don't go out and at least talk to them, we're never going to know.
Thank you. Next question. So somebody's asking, they say, I know we're supposed to focus on positive messaging and above all, not repeat any of the other side's wording, but we also need to convey the truly destructive nature of the other side. So how do we fight back? Any advice?
Don't be afraid.
All right, there is some strategy to how to do this. It's called the 3 V's. The first V is shared values. So mention your shared values. The second is name a villain, but get the motivation in there for the villain. And the last one is vision, which is this is what you get. These are the good things that you get. These are the nice things that we can have if we all pull together. So yes, you don't have to ignore the fact that there are villains in the room trying to actually take away our freedoms. You can use the 3 V's to get your messaging out there. And that has been tested, that has been white papered, that works.
Let me answer the question with a story. So last year in Pennsylvania, a guy named Doug Mastriano was running for governor. This was a bad guy, and he was utilizing a social network called Gab, and also buying advertising on this network, which is extremely anti-Semitic in nature. And he's going there because he was trying to find voters who agree with this kind of stuff. In order to illustrate for Pennsylvanians just what it meant that Doug Mastriano was collaborating with these people, we did an ad about the Tree of Life Synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh. And I actually had to call the rabbi and say, here's this ad, what do you think? And he's like, this is too much. So we recut it in about an hour, sent it back to him, and he said, okay, this works. And it knocked the you-know-what out of Mastriano. And we were not afraid because, you know what, he was a bad guy conspiring with bad people, and he needed to be called out for it. But those people who didn't know who he was or what he was doing or who he was doing it with needed to be reminded that this was someone they didn't want to be a part of. Not only Democrats in Western Pennsylvania, but Republicans and anybody of conscience. And so, the flip side of Dale's white papering and testing is we didn't test that ad before we put it up, right? We just knew that, the completes we saw in it were 89, 90%, which says people are watching basically everything but the disclaimer. And so I would say this is I like the 3 V's, but also once in a while, you just got to throw a rabbit punch and knock their teeth out.
I like rabbit punches.
I agree. All right. I'm going to bring this question ultra local, specifically here in Doña Ana County, where I'm at. So this question says, Gabe Vasquez, our representative in CD2, won by a hair, and his former competitor is back. Republicans are pouring money into this race. We know that Democratic voter turnout was poor in blue strongholds. Strategically, where would you focus on defending Gabe's seat and how?
I'm going to let Dale take that one first because I haven't done a congressional race specifically since I was, it was 1999. So I'll let him go first, and then I'll echo whatever he says so I sound smart.
Well, I'll tell you what I would do is I would follow the smart people that are on Blue CD2 New Mexico's lead, because you have some very, very smart people on the team, and they are incredibly diligent about looking into the data and then targeting how they're going to, go out and register new Democrats or get them out to vote. What can I do? I can bring the infrastructure of Field Team 6 to that process. I can help in any way that I can, but I would actually take their lead. They're gonna know much more about the messaging that's going to work. They're going to know much more about the areas and what's different. It's like buying a house to flip. I can tell you where to do it in Los Angeles. I can't tell you where to do it in Albuquerque, but people who live there can. That's the kind of information that you get from working with partners on the ground. I would bring nothing to this other than the infrastructure and sort of the general knowledge of if you want general knowledge on how to message a partisan, voter registration message that's issue based versus a GOTV message. Yeah, I can help with that. But when it comes to the specifics, let the partner on the ground lead. That would be you guys.
Yeah, what Dale said.
Thank you. Okay, we got a new question. It says, will gun rights play a role in the 2024 election? And they mentioned that there was a mass shooting tonight in Maine.
Yeah, 22 people were killed. I just saw the headline. I haven't had a story. I would say this is, I think, again, I think that there's a real opportunity here for certainly Gen Z voters, right? The idea that so many of our college age kids have either been in a shooting or know someone who's been in a shooting is big a shame that we must bear as a country as any I can imagine. And so I think that it can be. I will say this though, and I use Beto O'Rourke, who I love, next door. If any time you start to talk about confiscating guns, there are a whole bunch of people who hunt in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, who are sane, responsible gun owners who will think you're coming for them, right? They want safe, responsible gun use and gun ownership as well. So what I would say is it has to be one about our kids, our safety, responsibility. What you're seeing, look, I live in Utah, right? I mean, I can go down to the sporting goods store and buy 3 AR-15s. That makes no damn sense to me. It doesn't make sense to anybody else. So what I would say is this: go after the young people, go after the parents of college age kids, and make it less about guns and more about how is it we're going to keep our kids safe at school? Because if you can't keep your kids safe at school, you can't feel comfortable anywhere.
Agreed.
We have 2 minutes left in the Q&A. So, we talked a lot about strategy, about, what we're doing on the ground here. And I have one more question come in that I think is kind of interesting. And hopefully you may have some insight about the other side. So are we campaigning more effectively than Republicans? Or are they doing the same things that we've discussed tonight? Or is there any risk of them catching on and duplicating what we're doing?
Let me speak to this. I mean, let me speak from the Republican side. Dale's probably got a better sense of the field itself. Remember that the Republican Party today is part of an authoritarian movement. It is its political wing. It's got its propaganda wing, Fox, OANN. It's got its legalistic wing with Leonard Leo, and it's got its financiers. And so the one thing I would say is that, yes, there are more of us than them. A lot of the things they're going to do, there's never going to be an FEC report for, right? They just dump money into these groups that go out and do things. I guarantee you they're not following the rules. They don't care. At this point, why would they care about any rules? Very few of them have, been taken to account for it. They will spend all the money they think it takes to register voters. When I was in East Las Vegas last year, I think there was a Republican registration, station that they had set up there. Do I think that they are as good at it? No, I think they probably pay far too much because they've got to do a lot more work to find a new Republican voter. But I think they're out there. I think also they're stuck, as Simon was talking about, in a similar way as far as campaigning as the Democratic Party is. It's super PAC money, television time, just blunt instruments, and a lot of them. They also rely on the idea that, at least in a general election year, that Donald Trump has, this preternatural ability to suck up airtime and just crowd out everything else. I think it'll be less because he'll get a lot of attention for the various courtrooms he'll be sitting in. But, they will try to do that. But their campaigns are first and foremost at this point in time based on fear of the other. 90% of the party's white. You're going to hear a lot about those people. They're coming for you. You hear about all the woke stuff and those things, but it will be single-handedly to scare white suburban voters into believing that black people are coming for them. It's not going to get much more complicated than that. And so, it will be based in religion. It will be based in race. It will be based in a culture war that, again, they know they're losing. Which is why you see they do all the things with the court and the justice, in this federal judiciary and everything else. But Trump has a ceiling, and it's not very high. And what we saw in 20, if you recall, was that they needed a low turnout election because they knew Trump couldn't win a high turnout election. Now, if you had told me that Donald Trump was going to get 75 million votes, I would not have at all believed you. But the dynamics for them haven't changed. The difference, I think, now is that you will probably see more implicit threats of violence followed by explicit threats of violence, because they want to scare people. They want to scare people from participating. They want to scare people into believing that the world is coming to an end. Jesse Waters had this thing the other night. Somebody put a supercut together of him. Didn't say one thing about a Republican. Said everything about, Joe Biden is a doddering old man who's going to walk us into World War III and the streets are on fire. It's all bullshit, but it's all they got. Because remember, authoritarian movements, they have to create a past that never existed. They can't talk about the future because they can't control it. So the fight must be now, and it must be existential all the time. And I'm not talking about existential vis-a-vis democracy. They see it existential in a supernatural sense. God dies if we don't win.
When you get the link to this event, please share it with your friends, neighbors, family, and anyone you think might want to be involved in keeping CD2 blue. I'm going to go ahead and move to the sum up. Heather Cox Richardson has just published her new book, Democracy Awakening, and she stresses, as do all of our panelists, that it's up to us now, each and every one of us, to reawaken the civic engagement on which a flourishing democracy depends. That means donating today, tomorrow, and every day of our time, thoughts, energy, and financial resources to do the work that can make a difference. Thank you all for what you do already. And as Simon likes to say, do more. If you can help us with your time, please sign up on the website, join one of our committees, and spread the word that together we can overcome the ugly forces of authoritarianism and decline that have been gathering to darken and threaten our futures. Let's have a blowout election next year. Send MAGA packing for good and reclaim the future we all want on this beautiful, beleaguered planet. And I just have to say one more time how much we appreciate Dale and Reed and Simon joining us this evening, and all of our panelists and all of our participants. This was a smashing success. We're going to get within a hair of our goal. And with that link, anybody can continue to donate. So thank you all for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Rochelle. Reed, Dale, any last minute thoughts? or announcements?
No, thank y'all. This is incredible. You guys do incredible work, and I can't wait to get down to the land of enchantment and say hello in person.
Oh, we
That
love
would
to
be
have you.
lovely.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Well, as our virtual fundraiser draws to a close, I'm left feeling inspired, a sense of accomplishment, unity. It's always a blessing to have so many people from all across the country join us to support our efforts. So as we wrap up, I just want to ask all of you here to help carry this energy forward, remembering that change begins with us. Muchas gracias a todos por su apoyo y su tiempo, and your commitment to democracy and shared values makes these gatherings really impactful. I want to thank everyone who donated, who participated and engaged in the meaningful discussion. And because of you, we will win in 2024.
We will win.
Buenas noches. Good night.
Right.